Hi, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's session of how Snowflake, let me get it in the right order, how Snowflake uses Snyk to provide data-driven analytics for security. It would have changed the interview a little bit if we did it the other way around. So yes, it would be exciting because we wouldn't be prepared for it. I'm Mick McCulley. I'm a field CTO at Snyk, so I'm going to spend the next few minutes with you, given just a couple different things. The very first one is, I just want to make sure everybody knows who Snyk is, what we do, our focus, and we'll talk a little bit about the market. We'll also talk about some of the things that are disrupting the AppSec landscape, focus on empowering developers through the software supply chain, as well as creating the security feedback loop. The bulk of the session, though, I want to make sure, because this is the part that I'm excited about, I'm going to be spending some time with Jacob Selassie. I got it right. Specifically around their implementation and use of Snyk. And most importantly, a lot more about the people and the process. Spent the first part talking more about the technology, just to get everybody level set. And then love hearing how some of the people and process have been implemented, some of the best practices, approaches, things that have worked, things that have failed. It's intriguing for me, just on a personal level, but it's also one of the areas that I thought would be most useful to you as an audience. I think hearing things from your peers on what's most successful, what's worked, what they've tried, what they haven't tried, and some of the approaches that they've used can be extremely useful. So without further delay, I'm going to jump right into it. So the very first piece, Snyk, and it is Snyk for anybody that may be questioning it, unless you talk to some of our UK counterparts and they'll say Snyk or Snyk, but it is Snyk. And believe it or not, and I'm curious if anybody has seen this before, it isn't an acronym. I'm giving it away on the slide, but has anybody seen this already? Oh, cool. So this is my first piece of education, right? It isn't an acronym our co-founders created for, so now you know. And the idea behind it is we are developer security. Our goal at Snyk is to help secure the digital world. We focused on how we can help do that is by focusing on developers. We truly believe that a lot of security issues began and in a lot of cases end with developers. It starts with the code, it ends with fixing the code. The more that we can take security and embed it into those processes and inside of the development environment, the more effective we'll be. That also means that we need to be part of the workflow and process associated with it. And so you see a little bit of the ecosystem up here. This is just a small glimpse of the ecosystem that we work in. We'll spend a little more time talking about this. Very strategic partner with AWS, right? We fit into a lot of sort of the capabilities there, whether you're talking about the container registry, EKS, inside of the code pipeline. There's many sort of integration points and touch points associated with when you're creating applications to be pushed to Amazon Cloud, it makes sense to have some of this developer security embedded inside of it. So let's delve just a little bit deeper into the Snyk developer security platform. At the very top, you'll see two groups of individuals. You've got developer and AppSec. Now, historically, there's been friction between these groups, and a lot of it is because they have different goals. Developers are focused on creating applications, pushing them out, and helping to achieve the business objectives, right? And we need to get the application built, deployed to production so that we can take advantage of either first mover or new capabilities, new technologies. AppSec, though, is focused on risk, mitigating risk. Make sure that these applications that are creating doesn't put the business at risk and cause either brand, reputation, or monetary sort of impact associated with any of the risk that's created. Our focus from our security platform is how can we bridge that? How can we take a little bit of that friction out? How can we take the security expertise, put it into a developer workflow? How can we give AppSec teams knowledge and understanding of how developers work, as well as giving them the tools to embed inside of those workflow processes? So if you look on this slide from in the bottom, from the left to the right, you'll see that software development lifecycle. You start with the code, right? Developers write it or they bring it in with open source. Our foundation has been in the areas that you see on the left there. The first-party code with Snyk code, Snyk open source for understanding risks inside of open source, IAC standing for infrastructure as code, as well as Snyk container. How do I provide understanding of risk associated with these ideas and provide guidance on fixing the problems? But it's grown much bigger than that. Matter of fact, just last week, we made a couple of announcements associated with our expansion. We want to sort of help organizations with the entire application posture, right? Understanding all of the different components. We released or announced the release of a product called Snyk Insights. The idea is to provide a little bit more guidance and prioritization, is understanding all of these vulnerabilities that we can easily find, detect, and provide fix guidance, but prioritizing those associated with which ones you should focus on first. We also announced an acquisition of a company called Enzo. And the idea here is, again, to expand that spectrum to start to give some of the other items associated with what you're seeing on this slide. The release governance, the ability to have risk management and remediation aggregated inside of there, the ability to do prioritization, triage, as well as the ability to do discovery and orchestration. So the idea is, again, help understand where these risks are, but provide holistic views from the beginning of when code is created all the way out to when it's deployed. And it doesn't end there, right? You have this continuous loop and understanding. In order to have contextual awareness of these vulnerabilities, you need to know what's occurring out in the actual cloud. All of this is built on the platform that you see at the bottom. We have a component of Snyk called Deep Code AI. We officially named it. It's been something that's been embedded in the product for over 3 years now. This was from an organization we acquired over 3 years ago, almost 3 years. And it is part of the foundation associated with what we've put inside of Snyk to make sure that we can help organizations roll access controls, the data services, test orchestration, connectors that you'll see as part of how we provide some of these integrations into workflows. What's driving this? Some of this may be obvious to a lot of you, but managing application security is getting harder, right? We've seen developers introducing more code, the frequency associated with it. I'm sure you've probably been in some sessions here just today discussing generative AI. The idea of being able to create code is going to make it even accelerate further. Interesting enough, I have a quick story about this associated with sort of the expansion of code and applications. I was at a conference probably 1.5 years, maybe 2 years ago, and there was a large financial organization up on stage given a discussion around security, and one of the things that the individual mentioned was the fact that they had just getting close to 60,000 developers, which is insane. It's also the first time I saw somebody heckled at a security conference, which was also very interesting. I'm not encouraging it, but it was very interesting to me because somebody in the crowd said, "You're not a financial institution, you're not a bank. You're a software company that manages other people's money." And it was interesting for me to hear that sort of in that context. And again, you've probably seen this term that most organizations are software companies nowadays, right? And they're continuing to expand. There's lots of opportunity associated with it. So that rapid acceleration and creation of these applications is definitely increasing that frequency. The applications themselves are getting more complex. It used to just be writing the code. I have grandkids now, and I can tell them I learned C and Fortran and realized I didn't know this till just the other day that I was programming in BASIC on a Trash 80, years and years ago. That was very easy, right? I wrote the code and compiled it and published it. In this case, though, it's gone from being first-party code to now dependencies to being written on top of containers. That's actually configuring the cloud environment with all the settings, the network protocols, the permissions associated with it, all inside of code, all getting managed inside of a repository, and all being done by developers or platform engineers. In addition to that, the number of issues and the complexities of these are just increasing. They're not getting any lower. The backlog associated with all these vulnerabilities, the newly discovered and disclosed vulnerabilities, makes this even more and more complex. So all of these things have dictated that the approach to solving this problem has to change. You can't use some of these traditional sort of AppSec approaches. You can't test after deployment. when do you consider testing after deployment? I talk to organizations that push out every hour. Like trying to stay on top of that is virtually impossible. That means you need to go to a continuous testing model. It needs to be embedded inside of the workflow process. Changing it from an audit, right? Where are we vulnerable? Into focusing on how do I help somebody fix these problems? How do I help them identify it, and how do I get them down the path of resolution? Changing from code and infrastructure being two separate things, right? Data centers going away, to now everything being embedded inside of a repository, a code repository for developers, means you have to have this sort of holistic approach. And then this one, and I'll ask Jacob about this as well too, going from a handful of security experts to growing the organization to making your developers part of that security program. It's the only way it's gonna scale. Most statistics will talk about that it's usually 1 to 100 when you start talking about security experts to developers. Varies in most organizations, but that's usually a pretty good rule of thumb. Here's our approach, and some of the ideas that we've embedded inside of our product is to say, how do we take this security expertise, right, this knowledge that we've got on focusing on fixing issues, and embed it into some sort of consumable format that developers can use. And one of the approaches to do that is to meet them where they work. Take capabilities, not just take security tools and give that to them, but focusing on how do I surface up fixing the problem? Where do I focus on surfacing that up? And so when you look across the disciplines here, either the application developers or the platform developers, you look at all the different first-party code, third-party containers, infrastructure as code, all of that gets stored in a source code repository. Why not go there? It gets created very often in an IDE or through a command line. Why not give them a command line? Why not integrate into an IDE? Let's do self-assessment at those phases. Give them guidance. When they're picking libraries and containers, why not show them the risk associated with it to help them make those decisions? Very often, when code gets modified, created, it has to go through some sort of a pull request, a review check. Why not integrate inside of there and give them feedback associated with it? If you told me what I was introducing from a risk perspective, as soon as I got ready to push something in, it's great feedback for me to actually fix it when I'm in the state of mind of what I'm working on at that time. But in addition to that, you still need to put all these vetting controls, the trust but verify, and the additional checks in these processes of integrating into the pipeline. You need to look at artifacts stored in registries, and then you need to also be able to inspect what's actually deployed. What's there? Did my Rust posture change? As well as using that contextual understanding of the application, how it's deployed, what's there, what's the environment, in order to understand how to prioritize the issues that you find early in that process. So all of this is sort of interrelated, in addition to being based on top of application intelligence, understanding the entire posture. Education and awareness is a critical part of this. Again, the more you can promote education and understanding of what security issues are, why you're asking somebody to fix them, in addition to making sure the accuracy of your findings is as high as possible, because losing confidence inside of security solutions is very detrimental from a developer experience. The software supply chain too, and there's lots of conversations about software supply chain. When you start to look at the risks introduced, and there's many different ways risk can get introduced as part of the software supply chain. Two prominent ones are consumption of open source and containers. You're bringing in code from somebody else. So again, why not give developers insight to help them choose these safe packages, identify and track and understand all of these dependencies? Software bill of materials, right? As part of the executive order, the ability to communicate the embedded open source inside of applications has become a prominent focus on everybody. Why not provide that information early in the process? Prioritize and provide fixed information associated with top risks, governing all those releases, and then continuously test. In addition to that, once applications are deployed, again, they're still alive, right? This isn't the end, it's just the beginning of sort of this continuous loop. So one of the other things is the ability to say, if you're defining policies, what the cloud environment could look like or should look like, why not provide those policies and guidelines when they're actually creating infrastructure as code that creates it? If there's variance or differences between there, Why not make sure that you understand where did it originate? Is it what it's supposed to be? I'll give you a perfect example of this. I've had some conversations with some large organizations where they had the ability to check their cloud environment, had even implemented some auto-remediation strategies associated with it. Interesting enough, a few of them shared with me they implemented these, but what they found is every hour it kept reverting back to this insecure state. And they kept issuing this auto-remediation, then revert right back. And there was this window when it was insecure. What they realized was the developers were deploying to production every hour. The infrastructure as code was configured in that insecure state. So it was simply overriding it continuously. So being able to identify what's there and why it's there, as well as making sure that you change what was causing that in the first place, becomes critical elements of understanding the entire life cycle. All of this means that you need to change, again, from some of these traditional processes, from manually stitching things together, manually triaging these things, going from, hey, I found something, I'm going to throw it into a ticket management system, and start to provide some of this feedback early as possible. Doesn't mean ticket management systems are bad. Matter of fact, some organizations still use them, so being able to facilitate them becomes important. It just shouldn't be the only way that you interact with those individuals. So as much as you can empower developers in the process, you can provide some of this automated guidance, you can provide fixed details, helps to actually march down this path. One of the things that we also take pride in is the fact that this idea that we have from a developer security is getting awareness, accolades in the market. The Gartner Magic Quadrant was just released, and 2 years ago, Snyk just made it into the Gartner Magic Quadrant. It's the first time we appeared. This year, we're actually shown as a leader, so this is something that we're very proud of and take pride in the fact that we're doing things differently, but it is getting acknowledged. And the fact that our customers are appreciating this and doing it different is also something where we got the Pure Insights Customer's Choice in 2022. So with that said, and I think I did a good job of keeping it to like 20 minutes, I'd like to invite on stage with me Jacob Selassie. Did it twice, great.
Twice,
to delve into a couple of questions, and again, this aspect for me is to, one, share details associated with how Jacob and Snowflake has implemented not only the use of Snyk, but some of the people and processes associated with the approach to make sure that developer security becomes a way to effectively embed security inside of that development process. So I'm going to grab my questions here just so. So first, Jacob, I figured it makes sense to introduce yourself to the audience here, tell them a little bit about Snowflake, maybe your role, and then I know I was very intrigued by the fact that how you got started in security and sort of what you're doing, so as much as you're willing to share about that.
All right. So Snowflake, I think a lot of people know us as a data warehouse, or maybe you don't know us at all. I hope you at least know us as a data warehouse, but I think what I hope everyone takes away from here is that like data warehousing is the most boring part of what we do, but like deriving insights from data, that's what you're really interested in. I think it's important to understand Snowflake is trying to be all of that in terms of a platform where you can bring the data and drive the insights. So there's my Snowflake pitch, and we're going to talk about what I learned to appreciate about data, whereas coming from the outside as someone who was not a database person, like I was a kernel programmer before this. So I didn't know everything that data could do for a security team, especially an application security team. My role at Snowflake is Director of Product Security and Regulatory Expansion. I think if you work in those areas, you can appreciate the overlap of the Venn diagram, so I kind of appreciate that those two things happen together. Yeah, I've been there for about 4 years. I've got sort of think about product security as vertically integrated in the sense that we have an architecture team, a security engineering team, a software engineering team, incident response team, a threat detection team, offensive security team, and an assurance team, and we sort of all that rolls up into an organization called Product Security that, no surprise, we focus on the Snowflake product. We partner, of course, attacks don't just come from the product, they come from corporate assets first in most cases. But anyway, our charter is to focus on everything with the Snowflake service.
Awesome. One of the things that I did find intriguing, which I definitely wanted to share because I think it plays into your perspective, that I think that's been probably one of the more powerful parts of Snowflake, is how you got into security. Because that, again, I think we shared, we had similar stories. I stumbled into it myself, but definitely love to hear your background and how you got started.
Yeah, for sure. So I started in a network support role. I worked at a company in the early days. Well, I started my very early days doing desktop support. So if you've done that, shout out for you. But if you haven't, then you missed something real cool. Anyway, and after that, I sort of got into network engineering. I worked at a company called Radware, who built load balancing network appliances. What I would say is that's where I felt like my career started to take off, in the sense that I got exposed to varied and interesting things. When you load balance major telcos, you learn about the things that are connected to those load balancers. You read packet captures, super interesting. Mm-hmm. Never a dull moment in a packet capture. And so anyway, I progressed my career, focused in network engineering for a long time. I was telling Mick earlier, I had a conversation with a developer that was kind of revelatory one day, where I felt like, hey, you know what? I think I can write the code too. I think I can support the product and write the code too. I've always been kind of an autodidact, and I had some hobbies like binary exploitation and robotics that kind of lended myself to learning C and writing C. And I just kind of figured out pretty quickly, you could join these two things together and pivot to a development career, which is what I did. And thank you to Citrix. I had a 10-year run there from junior support engineer to principal software engineer, which I thought was pretty cool. But then, funny enough, a gentleman sitting in this room right here, Jacqueline Walker, was working at a healthcare startup. It was a mutual acquaintance of mine from the binary exploitation days, and said, hey, I'm leading security at a healthcare startup, and maybe long story short, I think a developer experience could be helpful, and I know you've been doing that for a minute, so why don't you come try leading an AppSec program? And I was like, wow, that's a big jump, but let's do it, And so I did that. And so, I would say the first couple of years of that, I just did a meta-analysis of what's going on in AppSec. What has everyone ever written on this topic? And what do we think the state of the art is? Had some successes and some failures, moved on to another place. I think it's important to fail so that you can, know what you want to do next. But anyway, I wound up at Snowflake, and yeah, it's been, everyone says it's been a ride. Of course it has, but it's been another journey of being an individual contributor to, have a team of 40 people now. So that's kind of that part of it.
Yeah, which was also interesting to me that you started at Snowflake right about when I started at Snyk, and you had 3 individuals, I believe, at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
In the security department, and expanded to there. Along those lines, though, talking about expanding security,
right.
The idea and the concept of developer security, again, is one that we focus on it from a technology perspective. But as I mentioned, delivering a technology is fantastic. You still have to change the approach, the philosophy, the psychology, processes associated with it. So would love to get your insight into approaches that you leveraged inside of Snowflake that allowed you to start to have success.
Yeah.
And maybe even, I know you've shared with me some historical views on things that didn't go as well as you had planned.
So I kind of mentioned earlier, the thesis was maybe one problem or one challenge AppSec faced was a lack of developer empathy and a lack of engineering approaches. So I think that's sort of one thing that's always been important to me, is to approach it from the perspective of a developer. And without getting into a lot of details, I had a lot of formative experiences about what good and bad development looked like, and I came to appreciate some things about it. I think the second thing then, in terms of approach and thinking back to where I succeeded and failed, one thing I noticed, this was now 5 years ago, sort of looking out there, security champions was relatively new. And the thing I think I said to Jacques a couple of times was, I've read 100 people talk about the idea and present about the idea of security champions, but no one's said what they, how did it work out? So has anyone actually done this? Does anyone actually know if this works well? So that was an experiment we got to run at the first place, but that leads me to the second idea, which is security partners and volunteerism are not really the way. The way is engineering. And something I think we can approach this a few different ways. But what I'll say is something that's very important about our approach is we talk about engineering excellence. Like, we try to talk less about security, and we try to talk more about engineering excellence. And when you cross the line from engineering excellence into security, that's when you should ask yourself, should I be asking a developer to do this, or should I be bringing in a security engineer to do this? And I think something we really focus on is just how far up to the line can we take a developer, and where does that line stop?
Awesome. So in that frame of thought, looking at either security champions or identifying that security expertise or engineering excellence, what approaches have you used at Snowflake that has let you get there, right? Like, what was implemented? And then I would love to know too, from a organizational perspective, what was the buy-in from an executive perspective? Did it start with something that you developed? Was it something that again, it was latched onto, and how was that implemented?
Let's start there, because I think that's the beginning. I left knowing that at the next place, I did not want to do a volunteer program. So we had an engineering leadership transition in one of my first one-on-ones. Fortunately, I've had a great partner in engineering leadership at Snowflake. It's been actually really good. I'm very fortunate. But the first thing I said was, like, I'm not interested in asking for volunteers. I want a senior developer on every one of your teams, and I want every developer accountable for what happens here. And I said I want that to happen at a particular ratio. You mentioned it. It's essentially 1-7 or 1-10 when we think about partners to developers. But we said, like, it's not going to be optional. Every team's going to have one, and they're going to be some of the best, most senior people on your team who are going to do this role. And what I'm going to do is be a great custodian of what I said. I know exactly what I'm going to ask them and why I'm going to ask them to do that. So we went from the top. Now, there's a lot I could say about how we went from the bottom, but we had a lot of convenient incentives alignment in the sense that Snowflake engineers knew that they had to do security review and that they were all stacked up waiting for me and my two friends to complete them. And so then a big part of that was, okay, I've got the engineering leadership buy-in, and now I've got a story for the engineer on the ground who's kind of bleeding and dying that wants to ship their feature. And I've got the keys to this, right? I know exactly how you can go faster. So I would say it was bottoms up and top down, and what we had to understand is what was the incentive statement? And how are we going to position that incentive for a developer? Why were they going to care about this? And it was speed, and that we weren't going to ask them to do too much security.
Awesome. And that idea, the enticement, is a very interesting from a psychology perspective of actually getting them involved. From a continuous sort of involvement process, like, how do you maintain that program? Like, what sort of communication structures in place? What sort of involvement from those individuals in the engineering excellence capability is required?
So I'll hope everyone will look at their partners program, however you call it, champions, partners, and say this is an area for growth, because it always is. I think, like, the important thing, and maybe some anti-patterns, are to think of it as a hobby or a side project. And it needs to be like a first-class entity that you cater to, that you specifically get feedback from. One of the sort of sayings we have is make it impossible for someone to say that they could not give us feedback. Like, awesome. Make it so anyways. So for us, it is about intentional engagement, and I think intentional is the word I'll use. We are very intentional about how we treat partners. We create monthly venues for them, weekly opportunities within the teams. We have regular feedback cadences, whether that be surveys or individual interactions on one-on-one, and then we transparently present that feedback, and we're transparently accountable for driving that down, and we do that in product all hands. So for us, it's about transparent accountability and intentional maintenance of that community. And so there's people who sit and think most of their day around what can we be doing for partners, what other value can we get out of them. So a bit of a generalization, but it's about intentional focus, I think, is the difference.
That feedback loop is very impressive to me, right? The ability to actually solicit sort of guidance associated with, you're asking them to implement some of these strategies to help the organization, right? And to help them from an engineering perspective, but simultaneously listening for their input.
I think this is really important. No developer, well, actually I did have a developer come to me in the lunch line and say they liked threat modeling, which top career achievement. But anyway, like, fundamentally you're not asking someone to do something they want to do at a base state. So then you, like, part of the burden of being in security is, like, you always have a greater duty to demonstrate that you've listened and that you've understood the bar and that you've empathized with that bar. And so I think, like, security teams can get lulled into a sense of, like, I asked you once last quarter or I asked you once last year. we pretty much need to be doing this on a not quite daily, but almost daily basis. People need to appreciate that I can give you my feedback, and if we're not actioning it, here's the reason why, and that people generally agree that, okay, this is the best we can do here today.
I'm gonna throw you a zinger now, because this is one I know I get asked, and I'm curious if anybody in the audience has had this too, but number of vulnerabilities, backlog, just the amount. There's usually not a lack of things to work on and focus on from a security perspective.
Yeah.
So what's been the approach at Snowflake that you've sort of balanced that in order to be effective?
So I'll raise you one, which is that we're regulated, and I think if anyone here is involved in the FedRAMP game, you understand that contextualization, in other words, downgrading a vulnerability, has a finite ability. You may convince your commercial customer to accept some things, but you will not convince the federal government to do that. So the burden for Snowflake to fix vulnerabilities is, higher than average relative to someone who only operates in the commercial space. So, I think we're not sitting here talking about Snyk for, without that being the most obvious thing, which is actionable leads to improved fix rate. And so, we talked about it in a previous session. We mentioned this today.
Yeah.
We were asking, how do we know that Snyk was successful? Something that I really hate doing is going in front of my customers and explaining lows. And we have a UI, and we have a legacy UI and a new UI that we're rolling out. And you can bet there's some lows that are not meaningfully exploitable. But I'm very sick of explaining them to my customers, and my customers are sick of hearing me explain those vulnerabilities to them. And so we just said, guys, girls, women, men, whatever, just fix it. And for lows especially, because these were the things where everyone can come up with a reason why they're not going to fix a low. And so I'm not going to say that Snyk had a PR for every single low, but Snyk made PRs for a meaningful number of lows. And when you think about things that people are naturally disincentivized to work on, low severity vulnerabilities are one of those things. And so for us to be able to move the needle for our commercial customers who cared about this and our regulators who cared about that SLA, even if it was quite long, that was a big deal. Now, I don't think Snyk is a game changer for highs, criticals, or anything else. I think the proof is actually in that low pudding, because that's what nobody wants to mess with. But if you do the same thing for lows, then you're doing the same things for highs. But of course, what I'll say there is depending on what it is, fixed complexity and how much consideration you need to give it becomes something else. Now, what I will say is, so sure, you can improve your patching of dependencies by using PR-driven flows that can be merged, right? Essentially, you propose the fix. Great. That's pretty obvious. I think some challenging areas in that space are, well, if the PR is not available, if you have a transitive dependency. Now, I'd say within this, my third-party packages in my repos, that's a fairly tractable problem. But a challenge that we're facing now is in the container world, and in the third-party container world, it is almost an intractable problem. And so it's not almost, it is. There are many cases where we could not be compliant to where we need to be if we operated certain things. So we don't do that, right? But to say, well, we would like to be able to consume these things, or not necessarily in that way, but getting to a point where you can build slim images, whether they be first party or third party, and guarantee that those things are patched in the pipeline. You had some slides about this, but getting very, very disciplined about patching in the pipeline. The story you told about the team that patched the container and then the development team pushed a new version. I've lived that life, and that's comically bad. And that those kinds of things shouldn't happen, because you shouldn't patch, and actually security teams shouldn't patch production servers. And I could go on for a long time about that, but I think, well, that actually takes me to my last point, ownership and accountability. So I think everybody understands here that developers are accountable for the bugs in their repo, but how many people think that developers are accountable for the bugs on the server? I do. And I think in most cases, he told a story, I told a story, and probably many of you are living a story where security operations or other security engineers go and touch production servers that they had nothing to do with manufacturing and have really no, I want to be mean to anybody, but you don't know what it is. You didn't build it. And now you're being forced to go and touch it with your hands in production and change packages. Did you restart the service? Is the fix even live? And if you restarted that service, did you just bring down production? That's a garbage situation. So a big focus for us is, how do you get all of this now in code? I'm sure everybody knows this stuff, but if every server you manufacture is a unique artisanal experience, it's not going to work. That has to be pushed as code. But then finally saying, service teams own patching for the components that sit on top of the OS image. OS team, you own the patching of the OS base image, and by the way, this is slim and these things are slim. I think getting laser focused on that is a requirement for being successful, and that's something that we're spending a lot of time on.
Yeah, and I think I've heard this oversimplifies everything you just said, but the paved road is part of, I think, what you're implementing.
Absolutely. I think being able to show up and curate images, whether they be packages or images, and I just say the complexity is obvious. An image contains many orders of magnitude more packages than a package.
Yeah.
And so then your need to curate those things goes way up. And I think a lot of teams, if you were forced to patch everything in your container fleet today, I think you might be shocked at how many things there was no fixed path available to you.
I'm curious too, from a education, training, awareness, like how is it intertwined into the program?
So this is another one of these things where you have to be very intentional. I think a lot of people do like a quarterly security training, great. I think all of you have probably been to sleep in one of those. I think we do a pretty good job because they're like 5 minutes, so pretty good Snowflake, I'll say, and you can 2x the recording. But anyway, no, so the thing we try to do is not be that, right? Like I told someone else outside of here, you can hate it or not, Snowflake is a great opportunity in the fact that we get to pursue excellence. And there's so many market incentives that say we have to be good at security that we really do get to spend a lot of time thinking about what it means to be really good at a lot of these things. And so then thinking about being good at partners, thinking about being good at training. So for us, it's actually about kind of gating functions and just-in-time training. And so it's not whether about you did the threat modeling training during onboarding, you did that. It's not whether or not you did the follow-up in first month training, you did that. But it's about, have you done it recently given the time that you're about to threat model? So for example, if someone comes and is about to, because we curate these flows, it's all in a UI we control. If we see you're about to do a threat model and you haven't been trained recently or at all, then we're going to redirect you and say, hey, how about you don't do that? How about you take this refresher, right? And it's going to be very compact. So these are the things that we're really pushing into now. The second thing is to break them down. I think these are the more common recommendations, like you should have role-based training. It should be contextualized. You should not think you're going to get a ton of value out of giving the same slides to every single team, like you're just putting them to sleep. So the faster you can get to partners, developers, machinery that tells you, like, what is this team working on, so that you can then give them training, risk assessments, everything about who you are, what team you're working on, what technology are you using today, and what type of service are you building?
That focus training, the just-in-time training makes a lot of sense, because I think that's definitely more effective, right? When you're in the moment working on something, getting something that's geared towards what's top of mind, I think would be very effective. I'm curious too, because I know a lot of people, a lot of organizations that I talk to, especially if they're going down this path, right? The marketing term shift left or this developer adoption. It's an evolution. We've talked a lot about sort of the psychology, the process associated with it. And then there's the technical process too. Right. So I'm curious the approach that you take to either sort of a big bang, was it a slow evolutionary rollout? Did you identify specific groups and start there? Or what was sort of the approach, and any lessons learned as part of that?
Yeah, that's like another story I like to tell. Because we were at that, I told you all that like there was a time when everyone was just waiting on me to finish security reviews. Yeah. So God bless him, he's still there. I love this person, I'm not gonna mention him by name. But he had a lot of features that were backed up and they were very impactful. And he was looking at this thing and we were looking at how long it was taking, and it was weeks and months. And his comment was, you should declare bankruptcy on this. And I kind of laughed to myself because I was thinking, all this time I'm kind of plotting security partners and like, I know what's wrong here. Yeah. Like I'm just waiting for the right moment. And so anyways, I knew at that point we had obviously pushed it to the breaking point and we needed to just come and launch the program quickly, but it was literally the next day that we had already planned to launch this. So I responded to that person by saying like, I'm gonna say hold my beer, but just wait for tomorrow, right? Like we're gonna do this. And so it was a big bang and we just came out and said it. But now, of course, we pre-gamed it. We pre-gamed it with lots of people, but we launched it across the board and Snowflake was still at a size where that was okay. And of course we had actually, we did launch in the first quarter with 2 pilot teams, to be very fair. But then we quickly scaled that up. It wasn't our goal to, I think many of you are in a place where you have a highly heterogeneous set of business units and things like that. And Snowflake didn't really have that problem. So for us, we knew that we were gonna hit the gas quickly. We just needed a couple of people. And actually we knew which teams. There's a team that implements permissions, authentication, and authorization. They're called DB Security. That's the first team we targeted and just said, hey, show people that you can do this. They were some of the early ones that helped us prototype the process, but we didn't wait after that. We launched it immediately. And part of the milestones we reported were like coverage. How many teams? How many are outstanding? What's the success of these pilot groups? And we came and presented that on a monthly basis until it was fully rolled out.
I'm trying to envision any sort of fear you had during that process too, and are there any regrets associated with that approach, or anything that you, looking back, you would say, man, I wish we would have done this first or this first, or was it as smooth as you anticipated?
There's this quote from some movie, anyway, fear's the mind killer. Anyway, no, like it could absolutely go sideways, but like, you don't have time for that. Like the only way that this thing is gonna go and these teams are gonna ship is if you trust them. And like every security person in here, myself included, is like, oh my God, I don't wanna trust developers, what does it mean? Like that's the thing we ask ourselves the most is like, stop it. Like what will it take for you to trust them then? Like what is it? Are you just gonna be emotional about it and just have feelings, or are you gonna be able to say, if you did these things, then I would be able to trust you more?
Interesting. I am curious, because from a Snyk perspective, one of the things that we take pride in is the fact that we build these solutions so that they can be used like in many different aspects of workflow processes. And it's not our mindset everybody uses them, right? And the idea is to say, dependent upon your organization, dependent upon the development teams, dependent upon sort of the approach and process that you use the one that works best, right? You use the one that's most effective. Are there, or what approaches, I guess, have been most effective as part of your rollout? Where you integrated? Is it, and I know you've got some unique things that have impressed me, even outside of Snyk, associated with your threat modeling, which if we have time, I definitely want to get into. But like the idea of giving them that feedback, how do you empower them? Is it part of build? Is it part of pull requests? Where is it interjected, in addition to some of the training that you've already discussed and shared?
So what I'll say is what's important for us is to curate the entire experience, and this is where I'll just say what is application, or what is rather security data lake, if you were to talk about an approach. It could be lots of things, but one advantage it confers, if you think of every vendor as a data source and all of their data as data that either they give you insights directly with or you may derive insights from, and then you think about our internal goal of a really highly curated experience, that's great. I've normalized my interface to all of my vendors to tables in a database, right? And I can model those things consistently. I take the next step. So I do the investment in curating that data to developers. Now, if a Snyk will write a PR for me, bless them, please do it. But I'm also going to ingest your vulnerability data into Snowflake. I'm also going to couple that with Jira, because we do use Jira, but they merged the PR and I closed the Jira for them. But
Perfect.
In any case, so that's another piece. And another advantage it gives us is that if you rotate vendors, it allows a very agile vendor strategy, because it is now a commodity. And essentially everything that you do is now an ingestion job. And what it means is that if I change some aspect about the vendor, but I've built lots of automation after that, that's fine, because the data model that I build all my automation on top of stays consistent. And when I go and engage with a partner like Snyk, what I'm saying is, here's the data model that I have. How can you work with me to get your data here? And then my machinery picks up from there. Yep. So we have lots of machinery that talks to you when you need to be talked to. We talk to you on Slack when your vulnerabilities are approaching 75% of SLA. We talk to you during the build by breaking it when you've done certain things. We talk to you in your PR by leaving comments, or by, for example, depending on which tool, Snyk, having a PR, or rather having a fix in that particular PR. But there's other tools that are going to do things in the PR. So I don't want to say we're everywhere. I think we're everywhere we need to be. But what we really try to avoid, and I think this is the more important part, is we actually try to avoid anyone leaving the flow that they're in. So it's actually, as much as we love Snyk, it's actually not ideal if a developer has to visit Snyk. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that all of the information they need is right in front of them, and they don't have to leave wherever they were or whatever they're familiar with to resolve that particular issue. The second benefit that confers is that a finding is a finding is a finding, whether it comes from Snyk, whether it comes from my pen test team. I can avail myself of all of smart Slack bots that understand SLA, that understand who your manager is, and progressively blow you up more when you don't do what we need you to do. I don't have to go and try to convince a vendor, hey, build me this very nuanced capability that understands how to influence my org. So it puts us in control of things.
I like that approach, especially from a vendor perspective, because keeps us on our toes. Because if we're not giving you the data that's very valuable to you, then it makes it sort of an easy decision to say this can be done better someplace else, right? And I like the idea of, again, the focus of what we try to do is to deliver the information to developers. And so it's in any format that's applicable, I think is great, whether it's ours or whether it's yours. It's just, can you get it to them? Can you get it to them so that they can take action on it? Right. So it's an awesome approach. I love it. I did have you actually just brought up, which is one of the other things that I thought would be worth sharing too, because the idea of this data lake where you're actually taking a lot of this information and the vulnerabilities and putting in there, you're storing a lot of highly sensitive information about the vulnerabilities across your entire organization. So what kind of security controls, access controls have you built on top of, obviously it's Snowflake, but I'm assuming you're running in some sort of cloud environment, and our partners at AWS. Yeah. Like there's probably some security controls that are probably very critical.
So I'll just talk briefly. I mean, it's Snowflake's security story, and of course we're built on AWS among other clouds. But within AWS or any other cloud, Snowflake takes a fundamental posture that we distrust the cloud provider, and we encrypt all the data before we store it here. And we do that using keys either in the client's control or keys that we control. And when we write it back to S3, we don't use S3's encryption, we use our own encryption. Beyond that sort of fundamental distrust of every provider and sort of insulating ourselves from anyone who has access to physical media or things like that. And of course, like database RBAC comes in. Yeah. And of course, Snowflake is pretty good at database RBAC. And so security engineers who need to can access this data. But as you mentioned, SBOM is going to change that pretty soon anyway, and we'll be sharing lots of things with lots of people. But I just want to say that I think AppSec Data Lake is, vulns are the commodity case, and there's many, many people who will help you get vuln data ingested in. I think the thing that really brought us a ton of value was that one of the things we started out doing straight away was storing everything and structuring everything. Every threat model deliverable is a structured deliverable that can be parsed and loaded as data. And we didn't know at the time, and I kind of alluded to this when I said I wasn't really a data person coming into this. And for a long time, I wouldn't have really talked about something like an AppSec data lake because, again, vulns it's like bread and butter. But what we realized is not only do we have a bunch of sensitive data about the vulns, the state, what you can just start to generalize this is you're saying, oh, great, most SIEMs, most security data lakes have lots of information about actual state. They've observed something about a running host in the infrastructure. They've observed something about the actual configured, or rather the deployed configuration in the cloud provider. But what no one really has a good idea of, and something I really felt very strongly about that AppSec had failed at, was retaining its own artifacts and like doing science versus art. So like when you threat model, do you draw it on a whiteboard and erase it? Or do you put it in Confluence so it can die and no one can ever read it? Or do you think about like what makes a durable good? Oh, like maybe it's test cases that we're trying to get to here. At least that's what we believed. So anyway, storing these artifacts up, and what I'll say is over time, in addition to the vulns, we can at any time reconstitute a graph. It's modeled as a graph of nodes and edges about what every developer thought they built. In other words, the expected state of Snowflake at any given time from a crowdsourced set of, we control the way that they draw diagrams and we've incentivized them to do that. We store that data about every single threat model that gets built. And so there becomes a big opportunity to start to understand both by looking at the diagrams they drew and what they told us they thought they built, the code they wrote, the vulnerabilities it contained, the infrastructure as code that defined the deployment, and start to compare that. Is this what we expected, and is this what actually occurred? So I think AppSec folks have really struggled, at least I struggled for a long time to think. I would look at my peers, I'll stop after this. I would look at my peers in, let's say, threat detection and IR, and they're loving it. They're loving this data lake, and they're like, oh my God, all this data. And I'm like, why? Why do you care? What's in there? What are you getting from that? But it took us a while to realize. And I guess where this starts to get really big is for developers. When we think about like being excellent at delivering for developers, in exchange for drawing a basic diagram, like I'll give you the threat model, I'll even give you the test cases, and very soon we'll propose the test cases for you, the code for the test case, right? And anyway, we won't get into the details of how we're going to do that, but just so that I can not say large language models, there I said it. Anyway, the point is like if you get invested in this data, like large language models, great. There's some things those are really good at, but there's like a bunch of other analysis and a bunch of other insights. And I think at any time The epiphany for us was to say like, we got this graph. Can we find an unlikely path? Like, can we find a path between two entities we don't think have a path? And then like, whoops, it does. And like, yep, actually, that makes sense. I think that's really powerful. When you join a lot of companies, you'll say, man, I wish we had those architecture diagrams or that documentation. It's never coming. So a way to do this at scale is to get this from your developers.
And that last little feature, the idea of finding those paths you hadn't thought about and incorporating those back into your feedback loop.
Right, now it's a constraints, right? Yes. We can express the graph as a set of constraints and say, actually, tell us anytime a new node gets added to this. Tell us anytime these two nodes get connected because we never expect them to be connected, which was, you're gonna see this case, like, how do you know your threat model was invalidated? You had a design in the system that worked one way today, and now someone's proposed a change that fundamentally reconnects some of the network. Like, how are you gonna spot that at scale? There's thousands of developers making those kinds of changes. Yeah.
So I know we've only got less than 5 minutes left, and I want to leave just enough time for questions in case there are any. But before I do that, a lot of perspectives, a lot of interesting approaches, and some opinions on different ways that you can address these models. I'm going to leave you with one last question, which would be if you had any words of wisdom or advice for anybody here or anybody watching, what ideas or concepts would you leave them with?
I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. Stop asking developers to do security. Like, start deleting the word security everywhere you've written it. And anywhere you face a developer, like, attempt to delete that word and understand what that would mean for you. You're asking them to do engineering. Really want to convince you of that fact. So I think taking that approach, that gives you the side effect of you're coming from them using only a language that they appreciate and understand. Like, I'm talking to you about engineering. I'm talking about diagrams. Don't you draw diagrams and write tests? Like, are you a software engineer? No software engineer is going to tell you, no, I don't, self-respecting. You're going to say, no, I don't do either of those things, right? So I think coming from that position and then leaning in there and then figuring out where the line is, right? I did not talk about like how we have security engineers approach threat modeling, but there's an entire art and the science behind how we do that and how it's totally different than what we ask developers to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Speaking the languages of the developers, like that.
Right,
yeah.
And understanding what you can expect them to do.
So we have 3 minutes. I'm going to see if there are any questions.